Welcome back. For this lecture block series, we are going to be talking about Geographic Information System, known as GIS, and remote sensing. So the content for remote sensing and GIS can be found in the back of Chapter 1 of your textbook. Before we get started, let's go ahead and review scale. We identified large scale as being a representative fraction of 1 to 5,000. Remember, large scale showing a small area with a lot of large detail. And then we have our small scale, for example, 1 to 500 million. This is going to show a large area with little detail. And these are just something good to put in your notes and practice saying over and over again with having some examples. So for example, the map of Shasta College, where we can see individual parking lots and we can see building footprints, would be an example of a large scale, showing just a small area of Shasta College, but providing a lot of detail. Okay, so we went ahead and we talked about latitude and longitude. We identified significant lines of latitude and longitude. We defined large circles, great circles, and small circles. Now let's go ahead and dive in a little bit more into the geographic coordinate system of latitude and longitude. So as we see on our screen here, we see our two significant lines of latitude and longitude. Now remember that latitude lines run from west to east, but they measure the northern and southern hemisphere. And there's only one great circle for a line of latitude, and that's the equator. It equally divides the Earth into the northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere. We know that the range of latitude goes from 0 degrees to 90 degrees, and that's 0 degrees to 90 degrees north and 0 degrees to 90 degrees south. Okay, so lines of longitude now. Again, the little rhyme that we talked about in the last lecture series was that all lines of longitude are long. All lines of longitude are great circles. So for example, you follow one line of longitude all the way around the globe, and it equally divides that Earth in half at that particular line. So we define lines of longitude as running north and south, but they delineate between the western and eastern hemisphere of the Earth. And the two significant lines of longitude to know about is the prime meridian and the international date line. So the prime meridian is at 0 degrees and the international date line is at 180 degrees. Okay, so we see on the screen itself that there's a point A and a point B. So with the understanding that whenever we identify a location, the way that we describe it is we would describe it using latitude first and longitude second. Now, both latitude and longitude, you need to tie on which hemisphere that you are depicting. So for example, point A, we first want to define our line of latitude. So you can go ahead and see the line of latitude. We can follow A all the way across the side of our diagram, and we see that it is 20 degrees. Okay, that little symbol there is the degree symbol. Now, the question to ask next is which hemisphere are we describing? Now, because we are talking about latitude, we have two hemispheres to choose from, the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere. So in this case, we are in the northern hemisphere. So we would describe point A as 20 degrees north as the latitude. Now we can go ahead and we can run our pointer down to our line of longitude. Now again, line of longitude, remember these are long lines, great circles. So the longitude line that point A is sitting at is at 120 degrees, and we are in the western hemisphere here. So let's see what that would look like. So 20 degrees north, 120 degrees west would be the coordinate system description of that location on the Earth's surface. Okay, so now let's go ahead. Why don't you go ahead and try point B? I'll give you a couple seconds. Again, always defining latitude and then longitude. So for this particular example, you're coming down here, you are identifying your line of latitude, and then you're identifying your line of longitude. So let's go ahead and check your answer to what I have. So you should have something very similar to 40 degrees south, we're in the southern hemisphere, and 20 degrees west. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's dive into the geographic coordinate system a little bit more with more details of units. Okay, so as I just mentioned, that we define the coordinate system identifying latitude first with the north or southern hemisphere and longitude second with west or east. Now, we can break up a degree, a unit, into smaller units of measurement. Okay, and these smaller units are defined as minutes and seconds. Okay, and we can say that in 1 degree of latitude or longitude, there's 60 minutes. Okay, and that in there's 60 seconds in 1 minute. Okay, so for example, and why do we break it down into smaller units? Well, it helps us to be more precise when describing a location on the Earth's surface. So let's take a look at some of the samples of how latitude and longitude are described below. So if you were using a GPS unit and you're looking at decimal degrees, you may be looking at 40.58654 degrees north. Okay, so this is a decimal degree that's taking the units, minutes, and seconds and turning it into one large decimal degree. Okay, that's one way to look at a latitude or longitude. We can also look at a way to describe longitude using degrees, minutes, and seconds. So for example, 122 degrees, 23 minutes, and 30.0408 seconds west. Okay, and we can describe a latitude as being 40 degrees, 35 minutes, and 11.5440 seconds, north. And then we can also use negative and positive values in decimal degrees to describe which hemisphere you're referring to. So for example, the fact that we see 40.586540 as a positive number, this is in the northern hemisphere. However, if we were to see this as a negative 40, this would represent in the southern hemisphere. And the same thing can be said for longitude in the western or eastern hemisphere. So let's go ahead and look at an example of a more detailed geographic coordinate system. We can write out the minutes and seconds in a more detailed fashion. So for example, 44 degrees, 56 minutes, and 18 seconds north. And then 123 degrees, 1 minute, and 47 seconds west. Okay, so just keep in mind that we have a more precise way to describe a location on the Earth's surface using latitude and longitude by breaking up a degree of latitude into smaller units, such as minutes. And we can break up those minutes into smaller units of seconds. So another way that we can express this information, so again, looking at the 44 degrees, 56 minutes, and 18 seconds north, we can go ahead and convert those into decimal degrees. And those that are taking the lab component, you'll have some practice using latitude and longitude in the lab section for this class. Now, the way that we can convert the degrees, minutes, and seconds into decimal degrees is that we take the degrees itself. Okay, so we take the decimal degrees, and we're going to add that to the division of 55, that's supposed to be 56, divided by 60, because we know that there's 60 minutes in 1 degree. And then we take our seconds and divide that into 3,600 seconds in 1 degree. So that allows us to convert our degrees, minutes, and seconds into decimal degrees. Just so you know that this is kind of the workflow in doing this conversion. Now, we identify latitude and longitude, and we talked about the history of latitude and the history of longitude, and that latitude was discovered first in the fact that we can see observations on the Earth's surface. Longitude was something that was created, it's almost an arbitrary measurement that is associated with the ability to record time on a navigation vessel. So, you know, we had an early method of measuring a location on the Earth's surface. Now, nowadays, with the use of technology and satellite imagery, we can really elevate the use of our latitude and longitude and learn more about our surrounding area with the application of technology and maps and cartography. So the idea of GIS, and GIS stands for the Geographic Information System, is built upon the knowledge of geography. It's also built on the knowledge of cartography, which is the science and art behind map making, and computer science and mathematics. So the Geographic Information System, one can say that it is a somewhat of a new interdisciplinary field that's built on the use of theory of the GIS. So GIS science as a whole is this kind of new interdisciplinary topic. Now, actually, I'm going to go back here and talk. GIS as a whole, any discipline can use GIS, whether it be marketing and business, whether it be sales. I've sat in on lectures talking to the Geographic Information Officer at Starbucks and how Starbucks uses GIS to determine the location of their next store locations and looking at traffic and where customers are coming from to determine location and orientation of certain cafes. So when we talk about GIS, we need to define that there's three components that make up GIS. Okay, and so we can kind of describe these as three subsystems that make up the whole of GIS. So this diagram suggests that GIS consists of an input system, and this input system is a mechanism to collect data. Okay, so this could be the folks out in the field with GPS units, global positioning units. This could be the folks out there, taking observations and doing field work. Okay, the next subcategory or subsystem in GIS is going to be your computer hardware system. And this allows for you to store the data, allow for the data to be managed, allow for analysis to happen here, and then allows for the user to display the results of the data itself. At this point in time, I'm doing some work for an analytic company that takes billions and billions and billions of research points in the real estate industry and generates visual data layers so that folks such as Zillow and Realtor.com can display information to their clients. Okay, so that's our computer hardware output. The next third component is our output system that generates, it could be a hard copy map, it could be an image when we're talking about remote sensing, it could be an online map that is dynamic. So to give you a little brief history about GIS, GIS stems from the discipline in cartography. Okay, so the origin of it really lies in the science and art behind map making. So many planners use the method of map overlays as a manual technique, allowing for patterns to be identified. And so when you lay over different layers of information, you can see where there's similarities and where there's differences. And so the first kind of technique or application of this manual map overlay took place in 1950 in a planning textbook that was published in Britain. And this idea of this map overlay and being able to identify this blacked out transparent areas where there was a lot of commonality took place in 1969 in a book called Design of Nature. Okay, so imagine that we have a layer of soils, a layer of forest, a layer of lake, and the final overlay is going to tell us where exactly, there's a commonality with all three layers. So here's an example of this map overlay. It seems pretty basic, but this was something that was done with hand-drawn layers with collection out in the field, hand computations for mathematical equations, and then to produce this final overlay was very significant. We can also see this is the early cartographic output generating all the different layers and maps by hand. So for example, we're looking at a series of maps that are associated with planners and what would be applied for creating a neighborhood or looking at road networks. So the map in the upper left-hand corner identifies rock types. All those different colors and fills represent hand-drawn symbols of all those different types of rocks. The map in the middle in the upper line, top line in the middle is the communications map. So looking at transportation and roads. Again, these are all hand-drawn data layers. We also have the distribution of population in the upper right-hand corner. In the bottom left, we have sites for preservation. And in the middle, we have farmland. And then in the bottom right, we have a combination of all those map layers combined